As I mentioned in the previous video, all wasn't well that summer. Some things happened that led to extreme social anxiety and very poor mental health, and everything fever pitched around my 18th birthday, which unfortunately was the worst day of my life. Around a month or so later, I got diagnosed with a neurodiverse condition, whose specific type I would rather keep to myself. But the funny thing is, I realized it myself with all the events going on, and I actually consulted a doctor about it myself to find that I was neurodiverse. Regarding university, I really knew that I needed a gap year for recovery at that time, but the doctor and my parents really pushed me to go to university because maybe they thought I would feel better from going to university, because especially amongst this older generation, university is touted as, the time of your young life, which it did not turn out to be because I was pushed to go in those conditions in which I wasn't suitable. Given my mental state, the social anxiety, and the medicine that I was on, and obviously the long-term exhaustion from having studied from age 4 to 18, a gap year would have been great, but it wasn't meant to be. It didn't happen that way. Speaking of gap years, I don't know how they're viewed now, but in my day they were viewed by many as a waste of time. But why on earth is there any truth to that? There's no truth to that. We're in education from age 4 to 18, as I mentioned earlier. Why on earth would a break to recharge one's long-term battery possibly be a waste of time? We're humans. Remember the hare and the tortoise. Slow and steady really does win the race. I don't know how the story was simplified for the sake of teaching kids, but in reality, that hare burnt the fuck out, and that's why he lost. What didn't help either was my dad's drinking issues exacerbating. Even before these issues happened, but they exacerbated even more when the issues happened because he didn't know how to process any of it. To my dad, mental health is an alien concept. Still is, although it's a bit better now, but What also didn't help was that narcissist's best friend trying to help me, which, although he may have tried, most of his help involved berating me in many different ways, and eventually the rhetoric from his part evolved into, oh, you don't want to help yourself. It didn't take long for it to devolve into that, Before I get into the real details of my university experience, I'm gonna say that there will probably be times in this video or maybe the next where you're wondering, how did this guy get into masters and PhD? Is he any good at engineering? And trust me, I thought the exact same thing to myself for years. Luckily, I found that when I went to my master's institution, I found that ability wasn't lacking in me. So stay tight. By the way, that master's institution that I went to and got a higher score in was not only taught better, but it was also higher ranked for chemical engineering. Higher, not lower. Let that sink in. You may also be wondering, am I going to get in trouble for criticizing UCL this way? My response is, I really shouldn't do. In the United Kingdom, we have a right to free speech, which does include criticizing the university whom I paid tens of thousands of pounds. I'm well within my rights to do that, so I shouldn't get in trouble, on top of the fact that, okay, I'm going to give you a little spoiler alert, right? I asked for a type of guidance, which was easily givable in the form of a mentor who can show me around the department. Multiple times, and they said no. It's a fact that they said no every single year, even though me and my doctor asked. That's a fact. There's nothing to get in trouble for. Just to re-emphasize, that guidance was on the basis of my neurodiverse condition. So, first year chemical engineering, UCL 2013, let's go. Unfortunately, due to the really dire social anxiety, it took me 3 weeks to muster up the courage to go to lectures and be around people again. And suffice to say, I didn't go to any Freshers Week events, I didn't go out, nothing like that. I couldn't. So we met with our personal tutor that I was assigned, and me and my mom, because she had to kind of be there with me at the time, asked for the guidance, which by the way was not general organizational guidance, but guidance on the ins and outs of the chemical engineering. Unfortunately, my first few courseworks were really bad fails, but things got better and better and better, rising up to passes and eventually high marks as things temporarily got better. I will say though that there's only so much that therapy and medicine can do in an environment that's so cold, both socially and academically. In 2013, there was very little mental health awareness, as it kind of spiked shortly afterwards. So when people would see someone like me, kind of withdrawn, anxious, depressed, and had that kind of down aura about me, people would just give me the cold shoulder. Like, people wouldn't be like, hey man, you good? Like, yeah, it wouldn't be like that back in that day. I'm very glad things have changed now. What also didn't help at UCL was the very poor quality of teaching overall. Like, we were just given loads of equations and they were shoved down our throats with very little explanation, very little good explanation on how to connect the dots. And yeah, we were just force-fed those equations, which is not the way. To someone who's content with that, maybe it would have been fine, but not for me. And Any engineer should not be content with that, because when you're an engineer, you have people's lives and livelihoods in your hands. You need to know what you're doing to do it safely and sustainably. You need to know what you're doing. Just copying the equations or something, an extension of that, or not understanding what you're doing fully is not good enough. You can't do that. I can safely comment on the quality of teaching back at UCL after having went to my master's at a place which once again was higher for chemical engineering, where it was worlds apart and way better because it focused on understanding and not shoving equations down one's throat. So yeah, having went to a better place afterwards, I feel like I'm qualified to make that judgment. A lot of my fellow students shared the opinion that UCL's teaching was not up to par for chemical engineering. I'm not the only one who thought that. And interestingly, I looked at the student satisfaction, which low-key is teaching quality. And it was actually really high in the many years before I got there, but it suddenly dropped around the same time that our new head of year came in. I do have to mention that some of the new discord between me and the educational material was due to my personal change, because when you go through adversity, it's like the glass breaks in your mind and you see the world in a different way. I remember going to a maths lecture and looking at the same calculus, differentiation and integration material that I did in my A-levels because it was a refresher class, and going, what the fuck does this really mean, beyond the equation? Bear in mind that I got an A* in maths, and yet here I was questioning what it really meant. That can open up a lot of thought on the state of the human mind and the education system and how they interact. As if this wasn't bad enough, my best friend, I call him my former best friend, he just straight up started to bully me. By the way, I should mention that he was a medicine undergrad, so he was even more skilled in bullying me using the neurodiversity, because his rhetoric every single time at that time became, oh, you're using it as an excuse for everything. And I wasn't even doing anything. I wasn't doing anything for it to be excused for. Obviously, I was using it as a bit of a shield to feel better about oh, some things aren't my fault. Completely harmless things, partially maybe that my life didn't fully go the way I wanted to go, which is natural, but he really honed in on the whole, oh, you're using it as an excuse all the time. That is ableism. That is what it is. That is pure discrimination. That is the most insidious form of discrimination, when somebody has a condition that they're using it as an excuse. That's foul. And that guy is slithering around the medical field right now. There was even a time where he lied and told me that 2 of our other friends were considering cutting me out of the group for being distant, which, luckily was a lie. As if all that wasn't bad enough, my dad also started calling me disabled slurs because he couldn't handle the whole situation. So, I was at rock bottom. There's no other way to put it. But I will say this because it's pretty dark right now. Don't worry, things did get better. Unfortunately, I failed that year. I had to repeat it. So the repeat of the first year had a much better start and much better middle. Although the underlying issues of social anxiety and things like that, and the problems at home, were unresolved, but they tapered down slightly, or maybe I could handle them better. But the newfound success didn't quite last. At the very end of the year, despite good courseworks and good marks, maybe due to the medication and the underlying issues and all sorts, and maybe in part the poor teaching, my attention span just fucking disappeared for the exams. So I had to apply for extenuating circumstances and do them again in summer. And luckily I got those out of the way. But it kind of sucks because a year on from where I was last year, I still found myself in a sticky situation. A year onward, the bullying from that best friend just got worse and worse and worse. Luckily it was nothing physical, but it was all mental. But I was mentally, I was in the fucking gutter, trust me. However, this is where things start to change. So, listen carefully. So we enter second year, and unfortunately, due to the social anxiety, I skipped the first week of lectures, similarly to, 2 years ago, but obviously only 1 week, and I mustered it up. But here's where things get better. In my engineering experimentation class, which is literally where we get in the labs and collect data and do reports, I had someone in my little group who turned out to be the true friend that I needed and showed me what true friendship meant, as we really resonated on a fundamental level. And this was the start of a beautiful change in me. By the way, we're still great buddies now. We still keep in touch. We still go to motives together, which is really beautiful and great to have happened, considering that we do learn as adults that not every friendship lasts forever for various reasons. Being friends with him made me soon realize that that narcissist best friend was not my best friend, and it made me realize that, wait a minute, what he's been doing to me is bullying. That realization was extremely important, and it was a turning point. I had other friends at university, but like, they were nice, but they weren't as good friends as like, you know, we only clicked to an extent. We didn't click as deeply as this new friend I found in the experimentation class. So like, he was my best buddy. So even though I had other buddies, like, he was leagues above in terms of how he resonated. So yeah, grades were bad once again, but come Christmas 2015, this is where everything came to a head and changed. The first thing, by the way, this is not in a particular order. This was around Christmas 2015 to January 2016. The first thing was that I exposed that narcissist best friend to my other friends. And how do you think he reacted? In typical narcissist fashion, he acted like a limp-dicked, chicken shit little bitch and thought he was somehow the victim in all this. And honestly, I didn't even feel any anger towards him right now. It's like, you're a fucking shrimp, bro. That's what I was thinking. Like, you're not even worth it. And honestly, after exposing him and seeing how much of a fucking weakling he was and how unable to take responsibility like a man, or like a grown-up, should I say, he was, I didn't even think about him again. The next thing, funnily enough, was Star Wars The Force Awakens, which I love to pieces and still do, because seeing your childhood come to life and be revisited and reborn in a way like that, at a time like that, at a low point like that in my life, it was magical. Like, God bless Star Wars, specifically the sequel trilogy. I love it to pieces. So the final driver of change and the very most important thing, wow, I said most important, that's not even real English, but you know what I mean. The most important driver, the final driver of change, was me going to India for the first time as an adult in December 2015. At first, I wasn't looking forward to the trip, but it turned out to be a magical healing trip where I was reborn back in my home country. Well, should I say motherland, because I was born in the UK, but you know what I mean. So, having social anxiety and depression, going from a place like London, which is not accommodating and not warm and welcoming and hospitable, to a place like India, specifically my part in Gujarat, which had incredible hospitality and social warmth, that changed me and started the healing process, let me tell you. These are the kind of things you appreciate more as an adult than as a kid. Since as a kid, I went 3 times at age 3, 8, and 16. So this is my first time as an adult going at age 20. So we met with my mum and dad's university friends, and they all had kids who were around my age, some a bit older, some a bit younger. So I was kind of in the middle at age 20. And let me tell you, that was the first time in my entire life where I just fucking resonated with an entire group of people and felt like I could be myself. The best friend I mentioned, the good best friend, not the narcissist, the good best friend from labs I mentioned was one individual, and that was the start. But to go to a whole group that just loved me just for being me, where I could act with and be myself with no expectations on how to act or joke or anything like that, it was so magical to be wanted by a whole group of people and loved to be accompanied by a whole group of people. It fucking changed me. I also grew up thinking that I wasn't funny, that I had no good sense of humor, and that most people didn't laugh at my jokes. Well, luckily I found that that was not the case, as I was cracking jokes left, right, and center, and everyone was fucking laughing. And I did realize that there's a big difference in the sense of humor across the world, and that a place like London's sense of humor, which is more dry and like cutthroat per se, and India's sense of humor, which is more warm and open and boundless, that is where I found that I was funny after all, and like that continued in the UK. So all those revelations, finding that, hey, like this social anxiety thing, that was from, experience. There's nothing wrong with me. Like, that I was reborn straight up in that trip, I went in the metaphorical healing fountain and came out a new man, in which I returned to the UK. As you can tell already, I'm a very naturally energetic, upbeat, happy-go-lucky kind of guy, which to a lot of people in London is seen as too much and too energetic. But in India, I was beloved, man. And let me tell you something, right? The portrayal of us Indians in the media, especially the men, is skewed, and it's exactly that. It's a skewed portrayal, right? Like, you may be thinking, if you're non-Indian, or even if you're Indian, that the people I interacted with must be that kind of caricature type Indian, like, a bit on the poorer side, not so educated. No, let me Let me cancel that view from your mind. Let me nip that in the bud and eliminate any notion of them upholding that caricature in any way. They were educated and articulate and sharp. Maybe all that was in my head, but that's how I saw it, so I felt the need to clear it up. They were the best, okay? In addition to the funny jokes, we had some really deep and meaningful conversations, which are very hard to have in the UK because it's hard to come by people who you can have those kinds of conversations with. I came in to that India trip, for the most part, disliking my Indian heritage, and I went back to the UK loving it because like I said, in the media, we're portrayed as the lesser side of India, but I experienced the best of India for firsthand, and that changed everything. I should also mention, which is something I say a lot, that India is very mixed socio-economically to an extent where we were staying in some bougie hotels which would compete with bougie hotels in any other developed or fully developed, should I say, part of the world. Like bougie by any standard, not just India's type apartments. But right out the window, right across the street from us, you could see people trying to fashion some tents together out of tree branches and rags. And that did make me appreciate much more the roof I had over my head, both in India and in the UK, and everything I had in terms of food and money and provisions. And that is something you appreciate more as an adult than as a kid, because none of it is guaranteed. So just to cap this video off, I went to India in December 2015 as a broken boy, and I came out a fixed, reborn man. Thank you for listening, take care, and have a lovely day.